Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name's Ivana if you're new here. If you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is June the 16th. I had to look down and see my calendar because it's just flying by. But today we're going to talk about something that you might have seen in the national news since yesterday, and that is the Southern Baptist Convention. Now, this convention started yesterday. It goes through today. It ends this evening. Most of the major business was really conducted yesterday. And our own Greg Garrison was there in Nashville at the convention yesterday. He's joining me today to kind of recap some of the high points of the convention, some of the most talked about parts of the convention, and also talk about the convention's new president, who is an Alabama pastor. So, Greg, thank you for coming on here, for giving us all of the details. I think a lot of us didn't make it to Nashville for that conference. So we appreciate you making that quick trip and recapping it.
Yeah, they were packed in like sardines at the Music City Center. It's the new convention hall there in downtown Nashville, right next to the Country Music Hall of Fame. And there were 16,000 Southern Baptists crammed in there from all over the country. And in business yesterday afternoon, they elected a new president who is the pastor of what used to be known as First Baptist Church of North Mobile, Ed Litton. They call it Redemption Church now. They have a campus in North Mobile and one in Saraland. And Ed Litton is a very impressive guy. I met him after the election, and then he had a press conference, so we had to ask him lots of questions. We met his wife, who's also held some denominational positions with the North American Mission Board and so forth. And they are a very impressive couple. There's an interesting backstory to the couple, Ed and Kathy. Ed was married for 25 years and had 3 kids, and his wife died in an auto accident in 2007. And of course, this was very devastating to him. He ended up meeting and marrying Kathy, whose husband was a pastor at a Southern Baptist church who died in a car accident. So she was a widow whose husband died in a car accident. He was a widower whose wife died in a car accident. They ended up marrying, and she's a very strong first lady at Redemption Church down in North Mobile.
Now, we know that Ed Litton, Pastor Litton, has been there at, again, I think what you said is now called Redemption Church in Saraland and in Mobile. I believe he's been there since 1994. So got a good 27-year career there at that church. Now, he was elected as president of the Southern Baptist Convention in a pretty narrow election. Now, I think your number said that he was elected at 52% of that vote, and he just narrowly won to Georgia pastor Mike Stone's, I believe, at 48%. So very narrow margin there. Now, what was the biggest difference between those two pastors? What do you think ultimately pushed Ed Litton over the edge there?
Well, first off, that was the results from the runoff. So there were 4 candidates to start. Another one of the candidates is very well known, Albert Mohler, who's the president of Southern Seminary up in Louisville, Kentucky. He's a Samford University grad. So we had 2 Alabama ties in there with Albert Mohler and Ed Litton. Mohler actually had the second highest vote total in the early stages, but he didn't make the runoff. He had the third highest vote total, about 3,000 some votes. A lot of his votes apparently went to Ed Litton in the runoff. So Mike Stone had the most votes in the first round of the election. He was supported by kind of an ultra-conservative network that was basically campaigning for him. And one of their big issues was anti-critical race theory. The convention did pass a statement that did not name critical race theory, but talked about racial reconciliation and said that no theories are above the Bible and that the gospel is the only answer to racism, was basically the sum of their statement. They passed a statement 2 years ago during their last meeting in Birmingham, when the Southern Baptist Convention last met in person at the Legacy Arena. They did mention critical race theory there, and they were not really critical of it. They just said the same thing, that the gospel is the answer. The Bible should be the number one thing you think about and consult when dealing with racism. So they kept that line, which kind of ended up being the moderate line, although these people are all conservative. But there was this kind of ultra conservative campaign against critical race theory, where they wanted an outright condemnation of critical race theory, which we see happening at the state political level now a lot, trying to ban it in schools. Critical race theory, of course, talks about the history of the nation in terms of systemic racism, that it's the explanation for inequality in our nation today. And it's basically a scholarly theory that college professors have come up with, which emphasizes the fact that for 400 years, Blacks in America and also indigenous Americans have suffered discrimination and at times genocide with the Native Americans. So that critical race theory seems to be catching on a lot. It's gotten a lot of backlash from the conservative Republicans. Donald Trump has spoken about it. Also, another reason this convention was interesting is the first Southern Baptist meeting after the Donald Trump presidency. You remember the Southern Baptists lined up a lot with Donald Trump. They were very happy that he appointed 3 conservative Supreme Court justices who lean against abortion. That was a big thing for Southern Baptists. So a lot of people were looking to see where the Southern Baptists would be after Joe Biden took office.
Right. We know that the Southern Baptists really they leaned very conservative. The majority of the members do identify as very conservative. And you kind of bring up a good point with that critical race theory. We know that is something that's really a hot topic right now in both local and state politics and national politics. Now, I know that a lot of the base of the Southern Baptist base really wanted a harsher statement on critical race theory. We know that they really wanted to attack it. But that line that the convention ended up coming out with, of kind of a no answer, probably didn't please a lot of the 16,000 Southern Baptists that were in attendance at that convention.
No, it didn't. A guy got up from a church in Las Vegas and he said, we ought to have the courage to call a skunk or not say anything at all. But the current outgoing president, J.D. Greer, and the one that was just elected from Alabama, Ed Litton, both have tried to be a moderating influence on this. And Ed Litton has really made a career of racial reconciliation, working with Black pastors, trying to increase the Southern Baptist outreach among all ethnic groups. And J.D. Greer has done the same thing. I would not call them moderates. You see it, a lot of the national press that covered this called Ed Litton a moderate. And I guess by comparison, he was, because he was so clear on we need to emphasize racial reconciliation and not go down this rabbit hole of critical race theory. He felt that was a distraction from what they really need to be working on. So in a sense, he was slightly moderate in comparison to some of the hardliners. But the way the votes shook out, the convention decided not to go the hardline route with either the candidate for president or with the statement on racial reconciliation.
Mm-hmm. Now, we know another hot topic at the convention, was sexual abuse. We know that they did pass a resolution regarding pastor qualifications. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, late last night after the presidential election, they did pass a resolution on pastoral qualifications. And this is fairly important because they said any person who has committed sexual abuse is permanently disqualified from holding the office of pastor. That's a statement of opinion of the Southern Baptist Convention meeting yesterday. And that's pretty rare for the convention to come out that strongly on an issue that's considered a matter of the local church. Local church autonomy is king in the Southern Baptist Convention. They're really adamant about, you can't tell us what to do. Each local church hires its own pastor. But the denomination over the past few years has really been intent on taking a stance against sexual abuse, and especially sexual abuse by clergy. And so they wanted to make this clear that you can't be a pastor at a Southern Baptist church if you're a sexual abuser.
It's something that, a lot of people probably don't think needs to be said. A lot of people do not believe needs to be written in stone, but apparently it does. Maybe it took till 2021, but here it is now passed as that resolution. Cannot be convicted of sexual abuse and still be a pastor in the Southern Baptist Convention. So interesting that they had to really spell it out there, Greg. Now, got a question here from Cherry. If I mispronounced your name, Cherry, excuse me, but she talks about how, especially we know Ed Litton is very big on racial reconciliation, or that is what he preaches. She says, well, why is there no diverse people in leadership in SBC? That she says that speaks volumes in the ways that we have to go towards, quote, race reconciliation.
Mm-hmm. The first Black president of the Southern Baptist Convention was Fred Luter. He was elected in 2012. And Fred Luter nominated Ed Litton yesterday. And his funny line from yesterday was, take it from Fred, vote for Ed. So Fred Luter is kind of this legendary figure as an African-American pastor in the Southern Baptist Convention. He is one of about 10% in the convention. You got about 14 million members, about 10% Black. Many of those still maintain some affiliations with the National Baptist Convention, which is traditional Black denomination. But J.D. Greer, the outgoing president, has made it part of his program to increase the appointments on all the boards and agencies. He's tried to make it at least 50% of ethnic and minority appointments, Black and also Korean and other ethnicities that are represented in the Southern Baptist Convention. So they've tried to get them more involved, and Ed Litton said he hopes to continue to welcome in ethnic diversity in the Southern Baptist Convention.
You say that outgoing president has been his goal to, I just threw my pen on myself, that has been his goal to try to get 50% diversity in leadership positions. Has he achieved that goal?
Yeah, 50% of his new appointments to all the boards and agencies, he said, were with diverse appointments. So
that is new appointments. That is not sitting.
That's new appointments, right?
And we know that Ed Litton, again, that's something that he has preached, and that's something that he says that he will continue to do.
Yeah, absolutely. After his election last night, I said, you've really emphasized this a lot. Is that going to continue to be important to you? And he said, absolutely. We're really going to push this hard while I'm president. Is racial reconciliation, inclusion. So he definitely takes it very seriously and has had long working relationships with Fred Luter and other Black Baptist pastors to increase participation in the Southern Baptist Convention.
Now, we know, again, you mentioned the Pastor Fred Luter, who did nominate Ed Litton to be in this presidential race for the SBC. He did win, very, very slightly win, Ed Litton did. So you take those people who maybe are more on the, quote, moderate side of the Southern Baptist Convention, maybe not moderate by national standards, but moderate by SBC standards. Okay. You take them, you take this statement that SBC released yesterday that was not very harsh about critical race theory, kind of a sidestepping critical race theory, even though many people in SBC really wanted a harsher condemnation of that. So let's look at this election. Do you believe that the people who elected in the SBC Ed Litton to president, are they satisfied with that? Or did they want him to come out a little bit harder in terms of critical race theory and in terms of racial relations?
I think there is a big contingent in the Southern Baptist Convention that likes this very reasonable attitude that J.D. Greer and Ed Litton have. And these people are not liberals. They're not really even the moderates like we used to know in the Southern Baptist Convention. For years in the 80s and 90s, we had this battle between conservatives and moderates, and the moderates really were kind of left-leaning. You're talking about Democrats like Jimmy Carter and Al Gore and Bill Clinton were moderate Baptists. That element of the Southern Baptist Convention doesn't exist anymore. They've gone off to different groups like the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. The people who are in leadership now, like J.D. Greear and Ed Litton, they're just not hardcore right. They're reasonable people who also are super conservative in their theological beliefs. For one thing, Ed Litton was asked last night about his view on women in ministry, and he still believes that a man should be the pastor of the church. You know, he's not changing that kind of basic belief among Southern Baptists, that they call it complementarianism, where men are the head of the family and the head of the church and so forth. He still holds to that. So these guys are still pretty theologically conservative. They're biblical inerrantists. They believe that the Bible is free from error. They're not going to promote historical revisionist interpretations of the Bible. So these guys are solidly conservative. It's just they've said, wait a minute, let's not go off the cliff here with this hardcore stuff. We don't want to alienate people that we're trying to welcome into the denomination. And he feared that this talk of critical race theory was a distraction that was going to alienate a lot of black pastors like Fred Luter, who were worried about the way that would appear if they kind of took on this, what had borderline racist subtext to it.
I'm glad you mentioned women in pastor positions. We have a question here from Anne, and she says, well, what about women in leadership? We know, as you just mentioned, that Ed Litton says that he does not believe that women should hold the roles of pastors. He believes that a male needs to be a pastor of a church. But what about women in leadership roles? Maybe not necessarily pastoral roles.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and they have women in certain roles. You know, you could be, say, the registration secretary of the Southern Baptist Convention, but you couldn't be the Southern Baptist president and be a woman, just the way their theology is right now. Ed Litton got a little bit of heat from the hardcore right people because he did a sermon series with his wife up on the stage with him where they talked about marriage, and both of them are talking. And some people said, oh, he's letting the woman preach. He said, no, I'm the pastor, but we're talking about marriage, and this is my wife, and I wanted, she is a good teacher too. So they have women teachers and leaders in context, but it's still in the context of the very conservative interpretation of the Bible.
When you say in context, they're not necessarily in senior leadership roles.
No, they wouldn't be a senior pastor. The people in the Southern Baptist Convention who are advocating for women senior pastors, they've pretty much all broken off to the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, where they do have women Baptist pastors. And that would be real moderate Baptists.
Now, you mentioned a little bit ago about how this is the first convention to happen since President Joe Biden took office. We know that in 2019 was the last convention, the last Southern Baptist Convention that was actually hosted here in Birmingham, where both Greg and I are located, or at least on the outskirts there for Greg. But there was nothing that happened in 2020. There wasn't even a virtual Southern Baptist Convention. So fast forward to 2021. So we passed a year without having a convention. Now there is a new leadership nationally, just politically. And we know that SBC did align themselves with the former president, Donald Trump. Now we have a president, Joe Biden. Did SBC make any sort of outward statement regarding national politics?
No, I don't think you're going to see a lot of political alignment. J.D. Greear, when the convention was in Birmingham, said, we don't need to be perceived as a member of a party. We need to attract people from all walks of life, and we don't want to be perceived as being in the pocket of one political party. So he made that point. I think Ed Litton has that same basic philosophy that we don't want to talk politics from the pulpit. It's not about politics. He said he doesn't talk about politics from the pulpit. He learned long ago that just alienates people. And so I think some of your Southern Baptist leadership now with Ed Litton following up J.D. Greear is going to be a little bit apolitical when it comes to national politics. Clearly, they're going to stake out conservative biblical positions that they care about. And those are going to look a lot like the biblical positions that you've seen from Southern Baptists in the past, such as very strong anti-abortion, very strong religious liberty. They don't want the federal government infringing on them in ways such as telling them their hiring practices as it relates to people's sexuality, gender identity, and so forth. They still hold those things. In fact, they passed a resolution yesterday opposing the Equality Act. So that shows you they haven't changed on that, on their basics about abortion, anti-abortion, anti-homosexuality, and so forth. They're still a very conservative denomination and will continue to be.
Greg, we so appreciate you coming down, breaking all of this down. We know you've covered religion here, especially in Alabama, for a long time, and you are the authority there for us. So, Greg, thank you so much for this, and get some sleep. I know you had a long day in Nashville yesterday.
It was a long day.
That convention will end today, but
Yeah,
as you said, I think most of the main business was conducted yesterday. Greg, thank you so much. I will leave all of your stories here in the comments. If you have any other questions for Greg or I, please let us know. Otherwise, catch up on all of Greg's coverage of the Southern Baptist Convention, and I'm sure he will have some further coverage as we go as well. So, Greg, thank you. Everybody watching, thank you so much.